That's right.
Yeah, just if you're at home listening,
Those-
please hold up your cat and make sure
Those
that
who are late
they're
do not
also
get fruit
listening.
cup.
Yeah. Hi everyone. Thanks for coming to Balticon, and thank you for coming to our panel on Love the Setting, Hate the System, a situation that frequently comes up in tabletop role-playing games, live-action role-playing games, and various other games. But I think that most of our conversation today is going to focus on the analog gaming space. So yeah, I'm the moderator. I'm James Mendez Hodes. I'm in the greater New York metropolitan area on traditional Lenape land. And I'm a full-time game designer and cultural consultant. You might know me from games like 7th Sea or Magic the Gathering. I guess my biggest upcoming project is Avatar The Last Airbender is getting a tabletop role-playing game. So I'm a lead designer on that, or senior designer rather. I'm pretty excited about that. So the icebreaker question that we're going to go with for our panelists is going to be, what is a setting that you love with a system that you hate? And I guess for me, I have a lot of affection for the old World of Darkness games. Like I started out playing like Changeling and Vampire and stuff like that. But there are little tiny nitpicky things about like the dice system and how combat works, which aren't even necessarily that big a part of the game, but I cannot get over them. So that's my like problematic fave system wise. Yeah. So next let's go to Christiana.
Hi, I'm Christiana Ellis. I'm an author, but I am also the host and dungeon master of So Many Levels, which is a live streamed actual play and podcast. We play a lot of D&D, but other things sometimes also. As far as setting I love, but system I hate, I think probably the one that I would choose here is Starfinder, which, with a qualification, it's not to say that the system is bad per se, but when I got the book and I started playing around with making a character, like I loved all of the different like alien types and the lore stuff and everything, but as soon as I started just trying to get through the rules, it's just so detailed and crunchy, and it was just very not my preferred style. I feel like I have D&D already for that. I don't need another one that's that complicated.
It followed you into space. Nice. Adam.
Hello, my name is Adam Beaton. I live in Orlando, Florida. I do a lot of things, but for the purposes of this panel, I do a lot of YouTube and Twitch stuff. You can follow my Twitch at twitch.tv/HighlanderWins. I currently run several D&D games concurrently, but for me, the setting that I love the most with the system I hate the most would be Rifts. That's a really old school, late 80s, early 90s setting that really is, I really love it because you can literally do anything you want. You can run fantasy or science fiction or horror or whatever. It has literally everything in it. But I've played that system off and on, the Palladium system, which is what that system's called, for at least like 20 years, and I still have not really been able to fathom it completely. The one nice thing, though, I can say is that there is a version of Rifts, which was licensed by Savage Worlds. So it uses the Savage World system, which is a settings-agnostic system, which is great. So to me, that's kind of like the best of both worlds. But if you do want to run Rifts, I recommend the Savage World system, not the Palladium system. That system is so horrible. It's ridiculous.
Thanks, Adam. Next, let's go to Daniel.
Hi, I'm Daniel M. Ford. I am a fantasy and mystery novelist, originally from Baltimore. I live in Newark, Delaware now. I have also been playing and running D&D and lots of other games for 27 years, I think is the number now. Starting with, good old second edition, and the game that the system that I love, but I cannot handle, or the setting that I love, but I cannot handle the system, is Shadowrun. If I can be a troll wizard smashing corporations, great, but don't ask me to deal with a page and a half of rules for treading water.
Yeah. Grenade shrapnel bouncing off of walls is serious business in Shadowrun. Yeah. Thank you. Finally, Michael.
Hey everybody, I'm Michael Underwood, he, him pronouns for me. I'm an author and podcaster. I am probably best known for the Geekomancy Urban Fantasies or the Genrenaut series of dimension hopping novellas. I'm a co-host on Speculate, which is an actual play podcast. We've been playing Blades in the Dark as well as Rebel Crown. I'm here in Baltimore on traditional Kaskaskia land. I apologize if I'm butchering that pronunciation. I've just been trying to pick it up. My setting system bugaboo, I think the one I'll highlight is Star Wars. I've never really liked the system for any of the Star Wars role-playing games. I've had some where I've been fine with them. I'm currently playing in a Edge of the Empire game I like the game, I like my players, but half of the game still feels like it's from the 1990s, even though another half of it is clearly in conversation with like post-Forge 2010s and current story game design. I've been running Star Wars using Scum and Villainy, the Off Guard Games game by Strasha Simovic and John LaBeouf Little, and I like that a lot more, even though it's not an official Star Wars game. So it's funny that I've never really liked an official Star Wars game, though I've loved the setting since I was like this big.
Come on, villainies, what's up? Yeah. All right. So I was hoping that a good deal of this panel could be question driven. The one like guideline that I want to give our interrogants, I hope that's a word, our interrogants is try to keep the questions like broadly applicable. If you have questions about like, this is the specific game that I'm trying to do, and I have a problem with the setting, which different setting should I use? We will happily answer those in the Discord afterwards at far greater length than you asked for. But we're gonna try to keep a slightly broader focus during the panel. So yeah, so the question I wanted to start off discussing is, how can you tell when it's time? What are some of the warning signs? What are some of the feelings or experiences or, you know, reactions from other players that you might get, whether you're a player or a GM, that might clue you into the fact that even though you're into the setting, you might have to switch systems.
I mean, just speaking for myself, if your house rule list starts getting longer and longer and longer and longer and longer, then you have to start questioning, well, if you're tinkering with the system that much and you have to memorize a whole set of rules on top of learning the regular rules, why are you running that system in the first place? Clearly, it seems that you want to do something else. And to me, there's so many systems out there that if you're house ruling that much, maybe it might be time to start doing some research and finding a different system for what it is that you want to do.
Yeah.
I was going to say something similar. Like if you find yourself repeatedly having to say, okay, wait, so we have to figure out the rule for this situation says that it's this, but that feels dumb. What do we think should happen instead? Do we follow that rule? Oh, well, it feels like I have to follow the rule or else it's like not fair, but that doesn't seem right. Well, let's just fix it. And if you end up spending a lot of your time in game with that kind of stuff. The other thing, though, that I was going to mention is if your players start thinking of the game purely in terms of the things on their character sheet as opposed to inhabiting the character in the story, because at that point you might as well just be playing like a tactics video game, which, like, I mean, those are fun too, but it's a different sort of experience.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest warning sign would be, and this is like in like IP tie-in games. So it's like, okay, we're playing the Expanse role-playing game. I haven't played it, so this is a purely hypothetical example. If the players are like, this doesn't feel like the things I enjoy in the setting, in terms of like their experience with the rules and the play using those rules, that's probably a good guideline that it's not doing what at least some of the players are looking for. If you're going to a tie-in game or like your players are approaching a game excited about the setting or the vibe, like a simulationist kind of vibe, and the game isn't getting them there, that's probably a good sign to consider changing.
Yeah, if I feel like if you are constantly reaching for the rule book, you are constantly looking things up, sort of building off what Christiana said. We're here to play, not to read, right? And not just a matter of it's a new system and we're still learning it, but if it's a game we've been playing for months and months and we're still having disagreements about what a rule means, we're still having disagreements about how to interpret something, or we're getting into arguments about it, which my group is prone to do sometimes because we've known each other too long, then maybe it's time to take a step back and think about whether this is a game we want to play or not.
Thank you. Yeah, those are all really good warning signs. So then, so once you got that idea in your head that you have a setting that does something you like with a system that does something else, I guess the next step is how do you communicate it to your group? What happens if you say like, hey, I feel like we ought to try a new system or we ought to make some changes, and your group disagrees or part of your group disagrees? So how do you approach that conversation?
The only example I can think of recently is that I had a group that was playing a short campaign of Burn Bright, which is the Roll20 based system. It's a sci-fi. It's kind of got a light loose tone, and I think it has a lot of really interesting mechanics to it, and I was enjoying that. But this was right about the time that a new D&D adventure module was coming out, and I kind of polled the players. It's like, do you guys want to keep going with Burn Bright? And they pretty much all said they wanted to go back to D&D. And so like, I don't have a good answer of like, what do you do, except that like, sometimes what the players want, you have to kind of figure out like, obviously the game master gets a vote too, but at the same time, I think you need to listen to what kind of game the players want to play.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't really have a really good answer for that either, unfortunately. In fact, I'm kind of in that situation, but a bit in reverse. We're wrapping up a 2-year campaign where the characters in this group have reached level 20. They're almost at the end, and I've kind of let them know, because I usually run the games, like, look, we've been doing Dungeons and Dragons, medieval European fantasy for like 4 years now. I'm kind of medieval European fantasied out. Maybe we can try something else. And so we were having those initial conversations because we're getting near the end of the campaign. And some players are like, yeah, let's try something radically different. Some of my players are like, no, I really like medieval European fantasy. And then other players are like, that's cool, but as long as we use the 5th edition rules, we're fine with whatever setting there is. So I've got quite the quandary on my hands. So I guess the only thing is, you're just going to have to sit down and just communicate as much as possible and try to figure, we've been playing long enough that we're all friends. So it's not as if there's random people that we don't really know each other's quirks and everything. But as with any problem that I always see come up in any system, like I have this problem, but the answer is always communication. You have to sit down and you have to talk to people and talk to them on their level, and just sit down and work out whatever the problem is. And hopefully it comes to a agreeable solution. And sometimes it has to come down to compromise as well, which is of course kind of where house rules come in the first place. You compromise on things.
Yeah, I definitely ditto the focus on communication. The thing that came to mind for me is whether it's useful to pull your conversation all the way back to like a pre-campaign session 0 scale and go like, okay, can everybody think about what they like in the game, what they like in the mechanics, and what they're having trouble with, or what, some directions they'd like to go or something. And then you can have a kind of holistic conversation about where everybody is. And that may be clarifying, and having that conversation together may let people understand like, okay, well, this many of us like this part, this many of us are having challenges there. And a possible solution is, or a thing that I might pitch is, why don't we take like a month off from this game and try like 2 or 3 other games, one shots get a sense of what some options are, try out some other systems, and then come back and think about whether we want to continue, whether we want to bring some ideas from those other games into what we're doing already. Does that address some of our challenges? I'm a really big believer in playing broadly as a way of gaining tools for talking about and understanding how games can work for us.
That's a really good point.
Hopefully, in a group, everybody feels comfortable enough they can say, hey, folks, I'm not having fun, right? If somebody comes forward and says, I'm not having fun, that's something that needs to be addressed, because that's why we're there in the first place. I had to do that with my group that I'm running for, but I've known them all for 20 years. The new guy has only been in for 13 years. That's how long my group's been together.
Damn.
So it's a little easier for us, right? It's a little easier for us. We've known each other for, half of our lives. So I realize not everybody has that luxury, but that's the goal, right? That's the ideal, is you should be comfortable enough with these people that you say, I'm not having fun. And if it's, there can be a lot of reasons for that. But if it's system related, then hopefully the group's willing to talk about that. And my group is actually doing exactly what Michael just suggested. We've taken some time off from the thing I was running to play some Scum and Villainy and to play some wacky high level D&D where everybody started at level 15, which our play usually never gets there, right? So everybody's just massively powerful. And hopefully you have that option, right? That you can just talk to the people you play with directly and say, this isn't working for me.
Got it.
I had one more thought on that, which I guess I wanted to just maybe ask everyone else about too, which was just the idea that, like, in my example, I think part of what is happening is that sometimes people just want to play the system they know already, and they don't want to learn a new system. Even if the new system might be better, it just sounds like there's a hurdle of the learning curve. And I think sometimes, gentle pressure to get past that obstacle might be merited, but at the same time, you don't want to force it, because then people aren't having fun. So that's a challenge I've run into.
Something that I've seen in some podcasts along the way, and is now happening in a really big podcast, The Adventure Zone, is they're playing something that isn't D&D as a world building exercise to build parts of the world that they will then play D&D in.
Mm-hmm.
And shows like Friends at the Table and others have done that for quite some time. But I'm hoping that this encourages a broader set of people to think about other games as part of a rounded experience, and doing a little bit of something else that's still pointing toward a game in a system that you're familiar with gives you a little bit of both worlds, where you broaden your experience a little bit, but the players can always understand this is pointing back toward the thing I'm familiar with, and it's not going to be for months at a time.
Yeah. So the next question that I had on my list was, when do you hack and when do you switch? But I feel like we already answered a lot of that, so I'm gonna modify that slightly. Y'all are too good as panelists. So instead, let me say, what do you when you're switching, when you're looking at that new system, there's lots of different options, ranging from games like Fate, where it's very jack of all trades but master of none, like to a fault. And then other times where there's something very specifically focused on the experience that you were trying to get, but it's narrow enough that sometimes it's hard to make it hit with a whole group of players. So what do you look for in systems to switch to fix your problem once you've decided and you've got your play group on board? It's time to switch.
That's a pretty big question, because a lot of times I think it comes down to the players. What kind of things do the players want to do? So it comes down to communication again. Do you have players that are more interested in telling a story and the storytelling aspect of it? Then you're not going to go with something like Pathfinder, or something that's very, very crunchy, that kind of thing, because they're not really worried about min-maxing their character and how can I get the most out of this by doing putting together the right amount of rules and the right amount of things to make sure that my character is fully optimized so that I can swing for the most amount of damage or do that kind of thing. Whereas on the other hand, if you have players that are really into that kind of thing, then you're not really going to go for a rules light, breezy kind of, let's just do whatever. We're going to figure it out. And it's just kind of, DM'd or GM discretion kind of thing. So to me, like I said, it just comes down to communication. What your players want to do. So you sit down and say, what kind of game do you want to play? And then based on that, look and see, well, what kind of system best fits that, and just kind of go with that, start with that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
One of the things that I've heard about games that really resonated with me, I don't recall who said it, it's in the ether somewhere, but a game is about what the characters have to do to advance. So like whatever it is in the game that lets them upgrade their abilities or level up or whatever it is in that game, everyone kind of inherently wants to do that. And so whatever it is that the game has the player do in order to achieve that ends up being the game. And so like if a game is, if you're doing just standard XP, for example, in D&D, that's going to drive players to, well, we just need to, kill lots of stuff in order to get lots of XP. Or it puts the burden on the DM to either do milestone or, to come up with ways to attribute, well, you picked that trap lock, so you get 50 XP, I guess. Versus some games where you level up based on like you choose like a little story progression, and it's based on milestones in that story progression, or some powered by the apocalypse games. So like Root in particular is one that I'm looking forward to trying to run. In that one, you level up because you've chosen a certain archetype for your character, and it's like you advance when you achieve this type of story objective, which is unique to your character. And so, and often they are things that wouldn't necessarily be optimal for the party at large. And it's designed to encourage people to occasionally play their characters in non-optimal ways, instead of just saying, well, the party wants us to all get along and play nice with this town, but my character gets to level up when I challenge an authority figure in public, that sort of thing. So I guess what I'm coming around to the question is that what it is that you identify what it is that you think you're missing in your existing game, and then you look for a game that encourages that thing.
Yeah, about a year or so ago, I was playing the Sprawl with kind of a home group, and we had been playing Scum and Villainy before that, and we got to really liking the idea of an engagement role. And the Sprawl is from before when Blaze in the Dark came out, which kind of has the engagement role as a central feature. And we found that we didn't have a strong sense of what the game could do for us to let us have that clear delineation, because it does have a flow from legwork into the mission. And that dividing point is not as clear as legwork and engagement role in a forged game. And so we had a really specific mechanical interest in switching systems, even though we stayed in cyberpunk. So we went from a cyberpunk powered by the apocalypse game to a cyberpunk forged in the dark game, because we found that we were kind of almost like slapsticking, fumbling in that space between legwork and the mission. And that didn't fit with the kind of genre vision that we had of the way that we wanted to do kind of like heisty missions in that genre. And so we had there was a mechanical solution that allowed us to have the kind of setting, genre tone adventure that we were looking for.
That's cool. Yeah, I really like that that idea of switching from I've done that a couple of times. We switched from a fantasy game to a heist game for a heist that happened within a Pathfinder game we did. So that's a really cool solution.
I think you also need to look at what the game is trying to tell you too. I've told my players this before, 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, perfect example. They have the monster manual, Volo's Guide to Monsters, Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. Wizards of the Coast is trying to tell you something right there. They're trying to tell you that Dungeons and Dragons is primarily a game about killing monsters. Now that doesn't mean that's what it's only
explains
about,
a lot.
But I mean, they're, you know, when the game is trying to tell you something, listen. And if you don't really want to play a game primarily about killing monsters, then maybe it might be time to look at a different system and see what that system does and see what that can do for you.
Cool.
I feel like I have a much lazier answer to this question, which is I look for who has already made a powered by the apocalypse hack of whatever game we're trying to play. We see about playing that. The last time we wanted to play Shadowrun, we just played Sixth World because we took one look at the Shadowrun rules and whatever the newest edition was, and it said, nope, this isn't going to happen. So we played Sixth World. Or I will also often fall back on, and this is might get me into contention with Michael. I fall back on the old West End Games D6 system that I knew from Star Wars from back in the 80s. That was actually the first game I ever played, was West End Games Star Wars D6 system. And I can and have taught people to play that without a rule book because it's so simple and so easy and so cinematic. So if you're trying to do something that's going to be exciting and fast and get off the ground quickly, I think that works really well. If it's going to have magic in it, that's going to be tough. You're going to have to hack something onto that. But I absolutely love that system. I know somebody just used it for a Zorro game, which is a lot of fun. I've run a couple one-shots with that. It's just really like swashbuckling, fun, quick cinematic action.
Cool. So yeah, really good answers all around. It seems like we've been coming back a lot to a theme of out of character communication with your players that allows you to figure out what it is they're really looking forward to in this game or games in general. And then broadly researching different kinds of systems which are tailored towards their answers. And also, I guess, by the way, I meant to say earlier, Mike or Michael, you said you mentioned session 0. Could you just tell us what that is, just to make sure we all...
For sure. So I think there's a lot of different things that session 0 can be. I think that ranges from having the conversation of what do we want to play and what do we want from that game all together in one time, in one space, in one time.
Like before the game starts, usually.
Yeah. So like, we just finished a campaign. Let's all meet next week. And we're not going to play. We're just going to talk about what we want from this next game we're going to be playing. So cool. We're all going to be playing Thirsty Sword Lesbians. We've all got the book, or somebody's going to get the book, and we're going to show up. And for a whole session, we're just going to talk about what we want from the game, what play set we're going to use, what playbooks people are excited about, and have what could in some ways be like a pre-production meeting or production meeting, like you're going to put on a play or something, and you're all out of character, having a conversation as collaborators about what you want from the game. And that can include what safety tools what you're gonna use, creating a content list of things you do and don't want in the game. And session 0 can also be character creation. And so there's a lot of different things that it can be, but for me, it's ultimately an all out of character conversation about what everyone is interested in and a game being and not being.
One thing to add, I'll add on to that, is that you can have another one of those later in the campaign as a course correction sort of thing. Because I did have a campaign where, even though you can frequently encourage people and maintain an atmosphere of feel free to say something if you're not having fun or for any reason like that. But the truth is, it's hard for the people to speak up like that, even when you explicitly give them permission to do so, right? And so occasionally, like, you might find a need to say, okay, everybody, we're not playing the game right now. What we are is, as players, talking about whether this game is currently doing what we want it to do. And if not, what can we do to fix that? And so you can have sort of we called it session 0.5, but I don't know if that's proper versioning or whatever, but it just means that you can do that more than once. It doesn't only have to be at the beginning.
Yeah,
I've also done things where
I've connected it.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I've never formally connected it with the idea of a session 0, but I have actually done this with my group for a long time. When I get to what I feel is like the end of Act 1 or the end of Act 2 of a campaign, I will stop and say, okay, I think we're about a third of the way in. What is everybody enjoying about it? What do you like? What do you not like? What do you want to see more of? Do you feel like your character is moving in the way you want them to move? Is there anything you'd like to consider? Is there anything you want, any kind of play that we're not doing that you want to see more of in the game, basically?
Just tacking on what Christina was saying about players sometimes not feeling free to say things openly. I've done things where I've put out Google Forms to my players, and I've said, what is it that you want to get out of the game? What is it you want to see? What kind of settings, that kind of thing, so that they have the freedom to say what they want without worrying about, oh, what if I want to do this, but the whole rest of the group wants to do that? Oh no, I better just stay quiet and just go with what the group says. So doing something like that might give them a bit more freedom to say what they want to say without worrying about what groupthink might say.
Mm-hmm. So we had a Q&A question from Mike Chaplinsky. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. So are there any settings that are so tied to their mechanics that you can't effectively separate the two? I feel like there are some.
I have one that comes to mind. Now, when you say can't separate the two, I think in this particular example, it's a matter of it would be hard to do this setting with a different set of mechanics without it being really substantially different. But I think you could take the mechanics and make them something else in a different setting. But the Alien RPG has some really neat mechanics focused on panic. And it is really optimally designed to produce characters that are occasionally going to behave in unexpected ways because, holy crap, this something terrifying just happened, and you don't always have full control of yourself in those sorts of terrifying situations. And it's designed to produce an Alien or Aliens type of story where you have people who are literally dealing with something that they can't handle, and they want to fight the monster and behave in rational ways, but it is so scary that sometimes you have to roll to see if you can hold your bleep together, and if not, maybe you unload your whole clip firing at a shadow because you didn't manage to maintain your nerves of steel. And it has a lot of rules that are really built around producing those sorts of panicky, tense scenes like you would expect in an Alien movie. And I think that you're not going to be able to as closely replicate those types of movies without some sort of a mechanic that produces that effect.
Yeah, for this question, the things that come to mind are the really tightly scoped indie games, something like Dogs in the Vineyard. Everything about that game points back toward the idea of being young people with divine authority in tension with communities and themselves. And you could create your own setting version to replace the book setting, but it's still mechanically going to be about that thing. And when a design is really intermingled with the setting assumptions and the worldview of that setting as expressed in the game, then it can be hard to pull that apart.
Certainly. Let's see. Yeah, the one that came to mind for me was Polaris.
That's the one I was thinking about.
Yeah,
crazy.
Yeah,
that one
so
I don't know how you would pull that apart.
Yeah. So that's about a tragic fantasy setting in the far north of the world, where there's an evil star that's fallen into the center of the North Pole, and then there's a fairy society that has for a long time lived around that evil sun, which is constantly spitting out demons. And it's about these fey knights who are trying to fight back against it and slowly succumbing to the inevitability of failure and despair. And if you try to do that same setting in any other system, if you try to do it in D&D, you just beat the demons, you'd be fine, and it wouldn't recreate any of the setting would look the same, but it wouldn't at all feel the same. However, there is a hack of Polaris called Thou Art But a Warrior, which is set in the real world during the Reconquista. And so you're playing as Muslim knights trying to protect Al-Andalus against the Catholic Reconquista, and you know that it's going to end in everyone getting kicked out of Granada and so forth. But yeah, so it uses those same systems that were created for like the fairies at the top of the world thing to create a similar situation in a place where it really happened. Yeah.
Game that
I guess
comes
I
to
had
mind
that-
for me. Sorry, go ahead, Adam.
Oh, okay. I guess now I'm trying to rack my brain because I was thinking. I'm crazy. You were thinking of Polaris. You're like the only one of like a handful of people that have ever even heard of Polaris. I mentioned
Oh, yeah,
Polaris.
yeah, I
They're like,
played
what?
it.
What's Polaris? Yeah, it's really
Yeah.
fun. It's really fun storytelling.
Yeah.
The only like if you had put my feet to the fire, I guess maybe Dread. I've run Dread a couple times, and you know if you try to use the Jenga tower with something like D&D or something, I mean, every time you take a swing, you're going to try and pull from the tower. Like how would that necessarily work in a regular setting when you're, you know, usually in a game of Dread, it's not so much, you know, trying to fight off the creature. It's trying to, or whatever the situation is, it's trying to run away and not die rather than going in and casting spells and swinging your sword and that kind of thing. So I that might be a little bit of a challenge, so to speak.
Starcrossed also uses the Jenga tower.
Yeah. Oh, I love Starcrossed.
The one game I can think of is actually a diceless game, Amber, based on Roger Zelazny's Amber novels, where you play essentially an immortal, you know, prince or princess of the original like reality upon which every other reality is a shade. And at the beginning of the game, you bid on abilities for your character, right? And if I bid the highest for endurance, I have the most endurance of any creature in the universe that's ever going to exist. How do you quantify that? How do you put that in numbers, right? I don't think you could make Amber work in any system other than a diceless one. Whereas if I have bid for this to have the highest in this thing, I'm always going to win in a contest of this. And then it becomes about socially manipulating it so that the contest ends in the thing I'm best at, right? So that it comes down to me to me beating you by manipulating you into going up against me in the thing I'm better than you at. And you're probably my brother or sister too, and we're competing for dominion of the universe, more or less.
Yeah. So another question that I wanted to throw out is what are some mistakes that we can make during this process? So can you think of any times in your experience when you've made this switch, you've made these changes, and it hasn't hit? And what were the results, and then what did you do to course correct?
Well, early on when I first started playing Dungeons and Dragons, for example, we ended up doing a house rule of called shots. And I know some people who love called shots, but I'm not one of those people because I've found inevitably that when you add a called shot system to Dungeons and Dragons, inevitably what happens is everyone just keeps going for the head and just trying to kill everything quickly in one shot. And once you get away from the hit point system of Dungeons and Dragons and you're just trying to doing called shots to the head to try to decapitate something to kill it right away, then the whole system just starts to completely break down, right? So now I will say though, in defense of it, I have done things where I have done sort of like a cult shot thing, but it was for like a, you know, like a quote unquote boss monster. So I think of it almost kind of like if you've played any Legend of Zelda games where you have a big monster and you have to target certain parts of the monster so that like that part will like say fall off or whatever, so that it exposes the real part of the monster where you can actually kill it. So you're really putting together like mushing like 4 or 5 different monsters together into one monster. So, you know, you do have a called shot system where you have to sort of, you know, kill off certain parts of it in order to kill the actual thing. But in general, I found that called shots do not really work, at least for Dungeons and Dragons necessarily. So we just had to basically retcon it and just say, look, this is not working out because you guys are just going for the head, which means the monsters are just going to try and go for the head for you all the time. And who really wants a TPK every other session? Certainly not me. So why don't we just forget this whole thing ever existed and just rip up the piece of paper and move on?
You don't think the sharpshooter feat kind of captures that?
To a degree, yeah. But I don't think it's quite as broken as like, someone with, a sword trying to do a called shot. Just because, like I say, it just seems to always devolve into everyone just tries to do called shots to try to kill the other thing as quickly as possible.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I'm trying in my current D&D campaign, our so many levels campaign 2 that we're running right now, is that we have the same sort of, we had a Forgotten Realms-ish homebrew setting for the first campaign, and so now our campaign 2 is 100 years later. And it's funny you're working on the Avatar: The Last Airbender RPG, because Legend of Korra's update to Last Airbender was very much an inspiration for kind of what we were doing in our campaign too. But as a way to introduce a type of like magic and technology that is unfamiliar and strange, I started adding some things borrowed from the Cypher system and like Numenera and stuff like that. And that includes, magic items that are interesting and unusual and don't just automatically recharge, and they're like consumable but more unusual and unpredictable in that regard. But the challenge there is, it's a tendency that I think a lot of people have in role-playing games or video games, which is to this feeling like you have to use it at the perfect moment, and if this isn't the perfect moment, then you don't use it, and then the perfect moment never shows up, and you just never use it, and you end up with a bag full of 100 of these things that you never use. And that's what I was kind of running into a little bit early on, which was to just say, I'm giving you guys these cool ciphers, but you're not using them. And this mechanic is not going to be an interesting part of the game if you're not actually using them on a regular basis. And so I had to kind of just, this is part of what we talked about in our session 0.5, is just a saying of like, don't be precious about those. I will give you more if you use the ones you have. And so if you want to get more new cool things, you have to use the ones that you've got. And just kind of reiterate to them, do not think of these things as something you have to save for the perfect situational moment, because that will never happen, and then it just doesn't get used, and that's boring. So try to encourage them to use them because it would be kind of useful in the moment, and that's the best it's ever going to be. So just go ahead and work it with it.
Yeah, I think that. Go ahead, Michael.
Oh, it makes me think about what you mentioned, Christiana, about a game is what you're rewarded for.
Mm-hmm.
And like, okay, like designer brain, like what are ways to mechanically and or otherwise incentivize players? What do the Cypher games do? How do they talk about that? Is that more or less applicable to D&D, which is an interesting vector. Yeah. So sorry, back to you, James.
Yeah, I wanted to highlight that. I thought that it's really cool, Christiana, that in your example you're picking up on and then analyzing player hesitation. Because I think that this is a lot of the time we don't see players be like, table flip, I don't like this, let's do something else. Like that's difficult, like both socially and practically. But one place where we often see player dissatisfaction or conflict or something is in hesitation, when there's something that you expected players would do in a game like this, but they're not doing that thing. You thought that the game was going to be about taking like bold, daring, audacious risks, but nobody's taking those risks because something about the system makes them risky and disincentivizes them. So yeah, I think that's a really important angle of perception to refine in this kind of discussion. That's really important.
Yeah, I think that I've run into that quite a bit. And like another one of the things that we talked about in our 0.5 was just the players were planning everything out to an obsessive level of detail, to the point where I was having to say, maybe you guys don't need to worry so much about securing enough fresh water to last you for 3 months before you explore this cave, just in case I'm tricking you into trapping you in a waterless tomb for 2.5 months. So you better make sure you have enough water to last. And I'm like, maybe you guys just go in the cool tomb I created for you. We're here to play, have fun. I'm not trying to trick you.
I've never had that problem before, but I have had situations come up where the players are dithering about too much, and they're like, they come up with a plan, and then someone says, well, what about this? It's like, well, what about that? And then they're talking too much, and it ends up being, in some cases early on, I've had it where it was like an hour of trying to pre-plan stuff. And I've learned after a while, like I'll give them a certain amount of time just internally, and then, well, it looks like it's time for the monsters to come barreling through the window and start attacking you because you dithered too much. So I've had to learn that, there's a certain period where, let them come up with a plan, but at some point, I always tell my players, like the world is still moving, the clock is still ticking. So, you can talk as much as you want, but things are still going to happen. So just keep that in mind.
I like physically, if I'm GMing, I like physically leaving the table. I'm like, all right, I'm going to go talk to someone in another room for 15 minutes. When I get back, please have a very simple plan. I beg you.
Well, that's tricky in a live stream game, though.
Yeah.
Well,
definitely.
I just put the game I was running on hiatus because I asked the question, where is the party going next? And they started arguing about it for 20 minutes. And finally, I made someone else the host and left the Zoom. I was just like, I'm done, guys. You want to talk about it amongst yourselves for 20 minutes? You can do that for the rest of the night. I'm good.
That just makes me think of a mechanic along the lines of what we've been talking about in terms of how do you have mechanics that encourage the behavior you're looking for. And again, I mentioned it earlier, but the Root RPG is something I'm really excited to run when I finish my current one of my. I'm running Rime of the Frost Maiden. When we finish that, we're going to play Root. But one of the moves that is in there is that everyone can do once per session is essentially paying someone game resources to just do what I want today.
Yeah.
And so that way,
I do need to cut you off there because we have less than a minute left. But yeah, I wanted to. We can talk more about this in the Discord. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for being, such great panelists and getting so deep into this. But yeah, going forward, we're going to talk in Discord. But tell us where we can find you on the internet. Christiana, let's start with you.
Sure. So I live stream on Twitch our games, and I'm at Christiana Ellis on Twitter, but also all of my stuff gets posted at christianaellis.com. So you can find it there and links to YouTubes and podcasts and all that stuff.
Cool. Yeah. Daniel.
Mostly you can find me on Twitter at Sounding Line. I'll drop the chat and handle. I have a website, danielm4.com, but I never update it.
Nice. Michael.
Hi, michaelrunderwood.com, Mike R. Underwood on Twitter, and my podcasting games at speculatesf.com. Thanks.
Cool. Adam.
Mine's easy to find all across social media and on Twitch, which is where I primarily live stream. Highlander wins. So Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, Discord, the whole kit and caboodle. Highlander wins. Easy to find.
Cool. And I'm James Mendez Hodes at Lula Vampiro on Twitter and jamesmendezhodes.com on the internet. Thank you all. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for outnumbering us slightly. We'll talk to you on Discord.